They were the enemy, the women who had stitched the uniforms, typed the orders, whispered prayers for Hitler's victory, captured, shipped across the ocean, sent to the heart of Texas, a land of wide skies and suspicion. When the guards brought out trays of steaming steak and buttered bread, the women froze. Was this a trick? A test? Or was this really prison food? In that moment, everything they believed about America, about war, about mercy, began to unravel. By 1944, the mathematics of war had created an unexpected problem. Prisoners, hundreds of thousands of them. The Allied advance through Europe was relentless, systematic, overwhelming. With every liberated town, every captured position, came German soldiers surrendering in exhaustion. But not just soldiers. Nurses who'd tended wounded in field hospitals, auxiliaries who'd operated communications equipment, clerks who'd typed reports, cooks who'd fed armies, the vast support network that kept the Wehrmacht functioning. Women, captured, enemy combatants by law, even if they'd never held a weapon. The camps in Europe were overflowing. Britain was still under strain. France was rebuilding. America, with its vast interior and relative safety, became the solution. They would be transported across the Atlantic, housed in camps far from coasts and cities, put to work in fields and factories where labor was scarce. It was pragmatic, efficient, necessary, but it was also unprecedented. The German women knew what awaited them, or thought they did. They'd been raised on stories of American brutality. The propaganda machine had worked tirelessly to paint a picture. Americans were savage, uncultured, capable of unspeakable cruelty. Jewish-controlled, the Reich told them. Mongrel nation of racial inferiors, a country that would show no mercy to German prisoners, especially women. The stories circulated in whispers among captured women awaiting transport. They would be starved, beaten, forced into hard labor until death, worse. So when they boarded ships in Hamburg or Bremen, many said goodbye to hope. They expected to die in America. Just slowly, painfully. The Atlantic crossing was a funeral procession in their minds. The ship docked in New York Harbor. They were processed through immigration facilities, the same ones that welcomed immigrants. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. American soldiers, young men, most barely 20, supervised the transfer. They weren't gentle exactly, but they weren't cruel either. One offered water to a pregnant prisoner. Another carried an elderly woman's bag. Small gestures, probably meaningless. But to women expecting monsters, even small humanity felt enormous. The train ride south was long, uncomfortable, hot. Through the window, they watched America pass, cities untouched by bombs, bridges intact, children playing in yards. It was obscene. A whole country that didn't know war. They felt hatred for it, and envy, and a strange, unwanted relief. The bus turned down a dusty road in the late afternoon. Through the windows, they could see it. The camp, barbed wire, watchtowers, long wooden barracks arranged in military precision. A prison. Finally. This matched expectations. Guards stood at the gate, rifles visible, American flags snapped in the hot wind. The women clutched their belongings, whatever they'd been allowed to keep, a photograph, a letter, a prayer book. One woman whispered a prayer in German, others sat in numb silence. The bus stopped, the doors opened, heat poured in like a physical presence. Texas in summer is merciless. All right, ladies, let's get you settled. The guard's voice was casual, almost friendly. They filed out, squinting in the bright sun. The first surprise, cleanliness. The camp was orderly. Swept. Organised. No mud, no filth, no corpses stacked like cordwood. They were shown to barracks, long buildings with rows of bunk beds. Each bed had a mattress, thin but real, clean sheets, a pillow. One woman touched the pillow experimentally, as if it might vanish. Bathrooms at the end, a guard said. Showers work. Water's hot in the evenings. Hot water. In a prison. They exchanged glances, confused. Dinner's at 6, the guard continued. Mess halls across the yard. Don't be late. He left them alone. They stood in the barracks, silent, trying to reconcile reality with expectation. One woman sat on her bunk and began to cry. Not from fear, from the disorienting strangeness of kindness. Around 5:30, a smell drifted through the camp. Food. Cooking meat. At first, they thought it was for the guards, American food for American soldiers. But at 6 o'clock, a whistle blew. Dinner time, ladies. They emerged from barracks cautiously, followed other prisoners toward a large building, the mess hall. As they approached, the smell grew stronger, richer. Meat. Real meat. One woman whispered, "They're cooking something." Another replied, "For us, they didn't believe it." Couldn't. The mess hall was plain but substantial. Long tables with benches, windows letting in evening light, ceiling fans turning slowly overhead. At one end, a serving line. The women queued up, uncertain. Some hadn't stood in a food line that didn't involve pushing and desperation in months. American soldiers staffed the serving station, not guards with weapons, but cooks in aprons. One smiled at the first German woman in line. "Evening, ma'am! Hope you're hungry." She stared at him, uncomprehending. He gestured to her tray. She held it out mechanically, and he began to serve. A piece of meat, large, browned, still steaming. Her eyes widened. He added mashed potatoes, a scoop of vegetables, 2 slices of bread with butter. She watched, frozen, as her tray filled with more food than she'd seen in a single meal in over a year. "Coffee or water?" he asked. She couldn't speak, just pointed at the coffee. He poured, smiled. "Next!" She moved down the line in a daze. Behind her, other women received the same portions, the same impossible abundance. They carried their trays to tables and sat down slowly, carefully, as if sudden movement might make it all disappear. For a long moment, no one ate. They stared at their plates, at each other, at the guards standing casually near the walls. One woman whispered in German, "Is it poisoned?" Another, "It must be a test." A third, "Maybe it's not for us. Maybe we took the wrong trays." They waited for someone to stop them, to take the food away, to reveal the trick. But the Americans just watched with mild curiosity. One guard nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, eat up." Finally, an older woman, a former nurse from Munich, picked up her fork. If this was a test, she'd face it. If it was poison, at least she'd die full. She cut a piece of meat, put it in her mouth, her eyes closed. The meat was real, tender, seasoned. She chewed slowly, almost reverently. Then she began to cry, not sobbing, just tears running down her cheeks as she chewed. Around her, other women began to eat, cautiously at first, then with increasing hunger. Some cried too. Others laughed quietly, the sound of people whose reality has completely inverted. One young woman, barely 20, took a bite and whispered, "This is better than anything I ate in Berlin, even before the war." Her neighbor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In the doorway, 2 American cooks watched. One was a middle-aged man from Oklahoma, drafted into service, the other a younger guy from New Jersey. "They look surprised," the younger one said. "Yeah, probably expected bread and water." "My sister's their age." The Oklahoma cook nodded toward a blonde woman eating slowly, carefully, like each bite might be her last. "Could be her sitting there if things were different." His companion grunted. "Yeah, but things aren't different. They're Germans." "They're just girls," a long pause. "Yeah," the New Jersey cook admitted. "Just girls." The meal continued in strange, quiet intensity. Women who'd learned to eat fast, survival instinct, forced themselves to slow down, to savor. The bread was soft, the butter real, the coffee hot and strong. When one woman finished, a guard approached. She tensed. "Want seconds?" he asked. She blinked. "What?" He gestured at the serving line. "Seconds. More food. If you're still hungry." She looked at her empty plate. At him. At the line. I can have more." "Sure, go ahead." She stood shakily and returned to the line. Received another smaller portion. When she sat back down, she stared at the second plate like it was a miracle. That night, in the barracks, the women couldn't sleep. They lay in their bunks, digesting more than food. Why would they feed us like that? Geneva Convention, maybe? But so much, with meat? Americans are rich. Maybe they don't know scarcity. Or maybe it's strategy, fatten us up for labor. Or it's genuine. Silence at that suggestion. The idea was too strange, too threatening to everything they'd been taught. One woman said quietly, "What if everything we were told about them was a lie?" No one answered, but everyone thought it. The next day, breakfast was equally substantial. Eggs, toast, jam, oatmeal, orange juice. By the third day, the women began to accept it as real. This wasn't a trick, this wasn't temporary, this was simply how they would be fed. They started talking to the cooks, learning English phrases. "Thank you, this is good, what is this?" pointing at an unfamiliar vegetable. The cooks responded with patience, sometimes humor. One woman asked, "Why do you feed us so well?" The cook shrugged, "Because you're human beings, and we've got the food." The simplicity of that answer haunted her. They were put to work as expected. Field labor, harvesting crops, mending equipment, cooking and cleaning for the camp. The work was hard, physical, exhausting under Texas sun, but they were fed well, given water breaks, allowed to rest in shade, guards supervised but didn't abuse, corrected but didn't punish harshly. It was normal, almost mundane. The strangest prison imaginable, one where the worst hardship was boredom and heat. One woman wrote in a smuggled diary, "I have never been so imprisoned and yet so well treated. What kind of captivity is this?" News filtered in slowly. Letters from home when they arrived painted a different picture. Berlin was starving, Hamburg in ruins, the civilian population surviving on rations that wouldn't feed a child. One woman received a letter from her mother. "We are eating potato peels. Your father is sick. We have no medicine, but we survive. Do not worry about us." She read it while eating roast chicken in the mess hall. The guilt was crushing. The women began to understand their unique position. They were prisoners of war, yet eating better than civilians back home. Better than German soldiers in the field. Better, probably, than Allied soldiers in some theatres. The food became a burden, a reminder of privilege they hadn't earned and didn't deserve. Some stopped eating as much, pushed food around their plates. Others ate everything, driven by survival instinct and the memory of hunger. Both groups felt shame. The camp didn't exist in isolation. Word spread through local communities. Newspaper articles appeared. Enemy women dine on steak while our boys eat K rations. Luxury prison. Germans live better than GIs. Taxpayers fund feast for Nazis. The backlash was immediate and intense. Letters poured into government offices. Protests formed outside some camps. "They killed our sons. Why are we coddling the enemy? This is a betrayal." But others pushed back. One Texas rancher wrote to his local paper, "My boy is in a German camp somewhere. I don't know if he's alive. But I pray every night that someone over there is feeding him decent food, that someone sees him as a human being, not just an enemy. If we can't treat their prisoners with decency, what right do we have to demand they treat ours the same?" A local pastor preached, "Christ fed his enemies. He showed mercy to those who persecuted him. If we claim to be a Christian nation, we must act like it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The debate raged, America arguing with itself about what victory should look like. Corporal James Mitchell stood watch outside the mess hall, wrestling with his own thoughts. His brother had died at Normandy, killed by German machine gun fire. Now he watched German women eat steak and laugh over coffee. Part of him burned with resentment. Why should they eat well when Tommy's dead? But another part, the part raised by a mother who'd taught him kindness mattered, understood something more complex. These women hadn't killed Tommy, hadn't fired that gun, hadn't chosen this war. They were just people, caught in the same machinery of violence that had killed his brother. One evening, a German woman approached him, young, maybe 19. "Excuse me," she said in halting English. "Your brother. I am sorry." He stared. "How did you know?" "I see your face. You are sad. Many guards are sad. The war takes everyone's brothers." She walked away before he could respond. He stood there for a long time, something shifting in his chest. The women began to understand that the food wasn't just food. It was philosophy, policy, proof. America was demonstrating something, that victory didn't require cruelty, that strength didn't demand vengeance. Whether that was naivete or wisdom, none of them could say. But they felt the weight of it. One woman said to another, "They're trying to prove they're better than us, by being better than us." Her friend replied, "Maybe they are." May 1945. The announcement crackled through loudspeakers. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. In the mess hall, the German women froze mid-meal. Some began to weep. Others sat in stunned silence. A few smiled with relief. The guards watched quietly, giving them space to process. One woman stood up, walked to the serving line and asked, "May I have more coffee?" The cook poured. "Of course." She took the cup and said, in careful English, "Thank you for everything, for the food, for treating us like people." He nodded, uncomfortable with the emotion. "You're welcome." She returned to her table, sat down, drank her coffee while her world ended and began again simultaneously. With the war over, the question became immediate. What now? Repatriation. They would be sent back to Germany. But what Germany? The country was divided, occupied, destroyed. Many women had no homes to return to, no families left alive. no cities still standing. The prospect of leaving the camp, this strange prison that had become a kind of haven, filled them with dread. One woman confided to a guard, "I don't want to go back, there's nothing there." He had no answer for her, just sympathy he couldn't express in any helpful way. Before repatriation, some women wrote letters to the camp commandant. In broken English or translated German, they expressed something unprecedented, gratitude to their captors. "You could have starved us. You fed us. You could have beaten us. You treated us with dignity. We will never forget." My children back home had no food, but I, a prisoner, ate steak. The irony shames me, but also teaches me something about mercy I had never learned. You showed us that Americans are not what we were told. You are not monsters. You are just people. We were just people. Maybe that is the only lesson of this war that matters. The commandant kept every letter, never showed them to anyone, but never threw them away either. The night before the first group was scheduled to leave, the cooks prepared a special dinner: roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, apple pie. The women ate quietly, savoring not just the food, but the meaning. This would be their last American meal, their last moment of this strange captivity that wasn't quite captivity. Tomorrow they'd return to a Germany that didn't exist anymore, to freedom that might be harder than imprisonment. One woman raised her water glass, others joined her. "To our captors," she said in German, "who taught us that enemies can still be human." They drank together, guards and prisoners, sharing a moment that transcended war. The buses came at dawn. The women boarded with their meager belongings, wearing donated clothes for the journey. They looked back at the camp, the barracks, the mess hall, the fields they'd worked. A place they'd arrived expecting hell, a place that had given them something else entirely. Not paradise, still prison. But mercy, undeniable, confusing, life-changing mercy. As the bus pulled away, one woman waved at the guards standing at the gate, several waved back. Germany, 1945. The women stepped off ships into a landscape of devastation. Cities reduced to rubble, infrastructure collapsed, population traumatized and displaced. They searched for family among refugees and ruins. Some found survivors. Many found only graves or empty spaces where homes had been. They stood in bread lines that moved glacially slow for rations that wouldn't sustain life. And they remembered Texas, remembered steak and butter and kindness. The guilt was extraordinary. Most never spoke of it. How could they explain to starving countrymen that they'd eaten steak as prisoners, that the enemy had treated them better than their own government ever had? It felt like betrayal, or delusion, or both, but some told their children years later, whispered it as a kind of secret. During the war, I was captured by Americans, and they fed me better than I'd ever been fed in my life. I don't know what it means, but it happened. Their children didn't always believe them. It sounded too much like propaganda in reverse, but it was true. In America, the story faded quickly. The camps closed, the prisoners went home, the war became history, then nostalgia, then myth. The controversy over POW treatment was forgotten. More urgent matters claimed attention. But a few people remembered. The cooks who'd served those meals, the guards who'd watched those women eat, the ranchers who'd worked alongside them. They carried the memory quietly, mentioned it sometimes to grandchildren who didn't quite understand why it mattered. Decades later, historians would uncover the records, would document the remarkable treatment of POWs in America during World War II, would note the stark contrast with treatment in other theaters, would debate the morality. Was it weakness, wisdom, propaganda, genuine principle? The answer, like most historical truths, was complicated. It was all of those things and none of them. It was policy and pragmatism and the peculiar American belief that even in war, certain principles shouldn't be abandoned. It didn't erase the horror of war, didn't justify the violence, didn't make anyone innocent, but it existed. This strange pocket of mercy in a world drowning in cruelty. The story of those meals, of steak served to enemy prisoners, tells us something fundamental about human nature. That kindness is a choice. Always a choice. That mercy costs something, politically, emotionally, morally. That treating the enemy well doesn't mean you've forgiven them, doesn't mean you've forgotten what they did. It means you've decided not to let their actions dictate your own. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't on the battlefield. It was here, in a mess hall in Texas, where enemies sat down and shared a meal. where German women tasted food and freedom in equal measure, where American cooks served steak to people whose country had killed their brothers, where for a moment war's rigid categories dissolved into something more complex and more human. War teaches us how to hate, but sometimes even prison can remind us how to be human. That's not redemption. It's not absolution. It's just the stubborn refusal to let hatred have the final word. And maybe that's enough. An empty mess hall at dusk, tables clean, chairs arranged, windows letting in fading light, the ghost of meals shared, of plates filled, of unlikely mercy given. Somewhere, an elderly woman in Germany remembers the taste of steak in a Texas prison. Somewhere, an elderly American remembers serving food to the enemy. Both carry the same strange truth, that in the midst of humanity's darkest moment, small acts of kindness still mattered, still matter, will always matter. They expected punishment. What they got was a meal they'd never forget. And in that meal, that simple, improbable act of feeding the enemy, lies a truth worth remembering. The real victory is not in defeating your enemies, it's in refusing to become them.